You think it'd be impossible in modern society for a person to die and go completely unnoticed, but you'd be quite wrong about that. This week, my friend Matthew Santoro joins me while we examine
10 gruesome bodies discovered years after death.
An old woman who turned people away with expected results. Geneva Chambers was in her 60s when she suddenly went missing from the public eye. Neighbors remembered her as an angry woman who would often shout at people who got too close to her property, telling them to go away. And this worked for her. It drove people away. So when Geneva passed away inside of her home, no one would come around to check on her to see if she was okay for fear of being yelled at. Eventually, her lawn grew tall and unruly, and neighbors believed she had abandoned the home. Eventually, a lawn maintenance worker noticed Geneva's sliding glass door ajar, and upon investigating, found Geneva's decomposing body in her bed, surrounded by cobwebs. It's believed she had been dead for 3 years. It's also speculated that Geneva had shunned her own family for reasons unknown, and she got exactly what she wanted. She died alone.
It was supposed to be a regular routine check for the police, but it turned out to be anything but that. Tanya Slayton was pulled over on Interstate 64 in June of 2015 when police realized that she had been driving a vehicle with an expired license. Once walking towards the car, officers noticed a strong and unusual smell coming from the trunk of the vehicle. Tanya insisted that she had placed clothing in the back of her trunk and that it wasn't anything worth checking out. A large white stain behind the driver's seat was easily noticeable from her windows, making the officers incredibly suspicious of possible criminal activity. The officers opened the trunk when they found the body of a child wrapped in 2 garbage bags. Tanya was charged with concealment of a dead body and is currently being held in the Hampton Roads Regional Jail. An autopsy of the body identified the remains of Tanya's young son, Quincy JAMAR David, a 7th grade student that had been attending Virginia Beach Middle School when he was last seen in 2004. The body of Quincy Davis had been trapped in the trunk of his mother's vehicle for over 10 years. Quincy would have just turned 25 this year. An investigation continues into the case.
Though he may have appeared to be happy, he was anything but that behind closed doors. David Carter was a well-liked real estate agent living in Milwaukee. In 2007, David told friends and family that he was planning on moving on his own to New Mexico and would keep in touch after the move. Relatives soon lost touch with David after they failed to hear back from him. Over 4 years passed before police finally entered his home. Bills began to pile up and mail was eventually discontinued from being sent to David's house until police discovered the remains belonging to David on the 2nd floor of his home in January of 2012. An autopsy was conducted, indicating the cause of death to be suicide after David shot himself in the head with a handgun. Upon contacting relatives, family members stated that David fell into a depression and began drinking after the death of his mother, Joanne, in 1997.
Losing communication with her friends and family could have been the worst mistake she ever made. Joyce Carol Vincent was a British citizen living on her own in a studio apartment in Wood Green, London. Due to personal complications revolving around domestic abuse, Joyce began cutting her ties with friends and family, eventually losing all communication with every single person in her life. In February 2003, Joyce moved to a studio flat that was owned by Metropolitan Housing, a company that housed victims of abuse. Friends and family failed to notice what was happening in Joyce's life, giving her plenty of space, not knowing if she was dead or alive. On January 25, 2006, police entered the flat and discovered the remains of Joyce, lying with a shopping bag next to her. Her television was still on when she was found. An autopsy concluded that Joyce died in December of 2003. The skeletal remains made it difficult to indicate the cause of death. However, investigators believe she may have died from an asthma attack.
As mysterious as they were, they never left each other's sides, even in death. Andrew and Anthony Johnson were 63-year-old twins living together in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and were notorious for being private people who rarely left their homes. Many neighbors reported not knowing their names and occasionally spotted the elderly brothers doing maintenance work on the side of their house. With little to no information, the community lacked to acknowledge the disappearance of both men. On March 29, 2014, police were sent to check on Andrew and Anthony after a relative attempted to contact the brothers but failed to hear back. Once entering the property, officers discovered the remains of both Andrew and Anthony sitting together in their living room recliners. Officers reported seeing pieces of flesh hanging on to the remains. Autopsies on the twins indicated that foul play was not a result of their deaths. Both Andrew and Anthony Johnson died together in approximately 2011, sitting beside each other for 3 years after their deaths.
Sometimes it's difficult to let go of something that you cherish so much. Funeral arrangements were set for 55-year-old Martin Ames in August of 2014 after his loss to lung cancer. Martin's family had grown distant over the years, resulting in his estranged older brother, Alan, no longer visiting or keeping in touch with him. After the death of Martin, Alan made his way to the semi-detached home that once belonged to his younger brother and parents. In disbelief, Alan discovered the remains of his mother, Doris, lying in the front room of the home. Law enforcement made their way to the house in London and were able to successfully confirm the remains of Doris Ames. After extensive research, investigators concluded that the decomposed body of his mother had been in the front entrance for 10 years. Without spotting Doris in public, neighbors had simply assumed that she had passed away. However, this led to neighbors wondering why funeral arrangements were never made. Alan Ames and law enforcement were baffled and could not understand how Martin failed to report the death of his mother. Martin instead chose to let her body rot inside of the family home for a decade.
Decades had passed and no one seemed to notice she was missing. Hedviga Golik was an elderly woman who lived on her own in a small apartment in Croatia. Neighbors reported last seeing her in 1966. However, having failed to notice Hedviga around the complex, many assumed that she had moved out without notifying anyone. Without a trace of her whereabouts, a missing persons report was filed. It would be 42 years later, in 2008, when law enforcement and landlords broke into the apartment and discovered the mummified body of Hedviga sitting on her couch. Police described the apartment as a place frozen in time, as Hedviga sat down to watch her television while drinking tea. Her cup of tea was still beside her among a dusty kingdom of spider webs.
It was a typical night out with good friends that turned into decades of grief for 3 families. It was November 20th, 1970 when 3 teenagers from Sayre, Oklahoma vanished without a trace. The teens planned an eventful evening alongside their peers. Jimmy Williams, Leah Johnson, and Thomas Rios were on their way to watch a high school football game in Elk City. However, after failing to make it to the game, students and family members grew concerned about their whereabouts. Hours turned into days and panic began to set in. A missing person report was filed shortly after members in the community began searching for the teens. All 3 teens were last known to have been driven by Jimmy in his 1961 Camaro that November evening. Any leads that deputies received never made a breakthrough in finding the students. Unfortunately, months escalated into years until the community and Beckham County Sheriff's Department lost track of finding the teenagers. It would be 43 years later when on September 17, 2013, Oklahoma law enforcement discovered a muddy and tarnished Camaro at the bottom of Foss Lake. DNA was picked up from the badly decomposed remains, concluding that the bodies found in the vehicle belonged to the missing students. For decades, the community speculated that the disappearances were somehow tied to narcotics. The mother of Thomas Rios passed away brokenhearted in 2010. Family members reported that she had refused to move away from the town in hopes of seeing her son return back to her one day.
Vanished without a trace, but once being found, still many questions remain. Amos Shook was 44 years old when he disappeared without a trace in 1972. Amos raised his family in Caldwell County, North Carolina, and was an Air Force veteran prior to settling down. It was February 19, 1972, when the Shook family reported him missing. Amos frequently enjoyed his long drives around town in his 1968 Pontiac Catalina, and overall lived a peaceful and happy life according to neighbors and family members. His former wife told deputies that the two had separated, which led to authorities speculating that Amos might have taken off to be with another woman. Despite what deputies assumed, Amos's only daughter, Pamela, knew that her father would have never abandoned her, leaving his disappearance a tragic disbelief. Much time had passed and the missing case went cold, leaving the family with many unanswered questions. In July of 2015, Caldwell Sheriff's deputies began searching the bottom of Lake Rotis with the help of sonar technology. Diving crews were able to locate a car 30 feet below the water surface, about 100 feet away from the shore. Upon their discovery, deputies were able to resurface a rusted and outdated vehicle. Inside of the car was a set of decomposed human remains along with personal IDs. An autopsy was performed and investigators were able to identify the body belonging to Amos Shook, the veteran who vanished 43 years prior. Family members were contacted immediately after discovering the body. His daughter, now grown up, demanded to reopen the case after stating he would not have left me. He was a good father. Though his family now has some form of closure, the mystery still remains. No one knows what his intentions were or how Amos ended up at the bottom of the lake.
In a decaying family home lied a mysterious and disturbing secret that no one was ever intended to discover. It had appeared to be a regular business day when a contractor was sent out to clean out the vacant home that once belonged to Poughkeepsie residents James and Joanne Nichols on June 28, 2013. James was 82 years old when he passed away in the home from natural causes. Neighbors claimed he was a man who followed strange and obsessive habits. Living alone without his wife gave him the opportunity to overindulge in collecting useless items, resulting in a problematic hoarding. While the contractor began to sort through piles of litter and personal belongings, a gruesome discovery was made. It seemed as if an artificial wall had been placed deep within the family basement. Suspicious, the contractor pulled apart the wall and discovered a rather sizable plastic bin that inside held a large garbage bag. In utter shock, the contractor unraveled the remains of a body that had been hidden for so long that all that remained in the bag were tied up bones and a fractured skull. Police were called to the property and an investigation was immediately initiated. Dental records were able to match the remains to 55-year-old Joanne Nichols, who was reported missing by her husband James back in December of 1985. Joanne was working as a first-grade teacher in Hopewell Junction, New York, prior to her disappearance just before the holidays. Though police eagerly searched for Joanne, James had insisted that his wife couldn't have been anywhere and implied that she may have been suicidal due to the loss of their son, who had died of accidental drowning just 2 years prior to her disappearance. Joanne's autopsy concluded that the cause of her death was the result of blunt force trauma to the head, leaving James as a prime suspect in her death. After missing for 28 years, police still point to James. However, the investigation continues to stay open until justice is served for Joanne Nichols.
Thank you for watching. I'd like to give a very special thank you to my good friend Matthew Santoro for helping with this episode. In the description below, there is a link to his channel. You need to check it out. He has a lot of content that will absolutely blow your mind. So once again, check the link in the description below, and you will certainly not regret it. And of course, if you want to learn more creepy and bizarre things, be sure to subscribe to my channel. And I will see you next Wednesday.